Welcome to Prince Shorthand House. Exercise number 99 and 100. Sir Kailash Chandra, 140 words a minute. Total 2000 words. Be ready? Start. The Textile Inquiry Committee says that we are getting much less cloth than we had even under a foreign government in the year 1938-39. Only one conclusion can be drawn from this statement of the Textile Inquiry Committee in its report. I have great respect for his intelligence, and I know that the meaning of the report will not have been lost on him. What I was saying was that Indo-Pakistan trade is very important in the entire scheme of the import-export trade. That does not feature much. The market that we lost there is being taken by the foreigners, especially the USA and UK, and the market Pakistan losses in the country is being taken up to a great extent by these two countries. And if you see the line of trade, the fall in the Indo-Pakistan trade has given rise to our trade with one or other of the foreign countries with regard to certain commodities. Our import and export policy does not take initiative to see as to how the trade could be developed with Pakistan. I am aware of the political difficulties that are in the way of the ministry. At the same time, it is the duty of the ministry to take initiative and bring home the fact that unless and until we put our trade between these two countries where normal and natural economic ties have been disreputed on a proper footing, there will always be disadvantages on our side, and certain other interlopers will come in and take advantage of that situation in order to ruin our economy, and that precisely is what is happening today if you carefully took into the developments in that connection. There is yet another problem of our relations with UK that calls for a separate treatment. In the old days, the honorable ministers and their leaders and their camp followers were all complaining against the preferential treatment that was then called arrived at unilaterally for fleecing India's economy. Times have changed, and no longer are we supposed to be in the British Empire. We are a Commonwealth country and a republic. But what about those preferences? Have they all been abolished? Who are deriving all the benefits out of them? That is a point which needs clarification. Whenever we raise that point, we are told that we are deriving more benefits because of these preferences than the United Kingdom. But whenever we read their papers, their London Times economic section and all other papers emanating from the city of London, we find that they tell their own people that they are happy that they are having this kind of relationship with us, and they are gaining by such preferences. Now, are we to understand that we are both gaining as a result of these preferences? I don't think so. The position is not at all so. On the contrary, as a result of these preferences, India stands to lose. The position, I think, has not been altered to the satisfaction of our country. That the honorable minister will perhaps clarify that position when he speaks. If these preferences work to the detriment of our economy, the time has come when we must give them up. We need not go in for such preferences, and I am sure that the policy which is required has got to be adopted in the interest of our entire economy, not merely in the interest of our foreign sector and not merely in the interest of any particular sector. Reference has been made to sterling balances. I don't know how much of the sterling balances is left at a moment. It would not exceed 740 crores. it may be much less. A large part of our sterling balances had been expended with a view to meeting the deficits in the balance of payments. It was thought at the end of the war that these balances, which had accumulated there, would be utilized for financing certain developments in our country, for developing the economy in our country, in particular for importing machinery that we direly required. After the termination of the war, the reverse process took place. I would only mention that Sir Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister at that moment, has written in his war memoirs, he is very bitter about India's claims on sterling balances. He says that he does not like at all that India should make demands on the sterling balances. He thought that he had served India and therefore India had no right to claim the sterling balances. This is how he has written, although he does not use the same blunt words, but he makes it very clear. Here is the British Prime Minister who would not like a penny out of the sterling balances to be paid to India, but circumstances have compelled him to so many things. Similarly, he has been forced to accept a position where sterling balances had to be paid under certain agreements in installments, and we all know that. But you see that large chunks of the sterling balances had been spent for meeting the deficit in the balance of trade. A much bigger amount has been spent for meeting the deficit in the balance of payments, including such items as pensions. You know, we have a tapering annuity out of which pensions are paid, and that money is paid from the sterling balances. Therefore, it is a scandalous thing that these balances had been spent not for the development of the economy of our country, but for meeting certain liabilities which we might have just as well as avoided, and liabilities which we should not even recognize. For instance, the liabilities with regard to pensions and all that. It is no use trying to explain the position in detail regarding the sterling balances in our country. Next para. Sir, it is usual in all parliamentary systems of government for the President at the opening of a session to address both houses of parliament. It has been criticized as being merely a narration of facts which have happened during the past year, but that is the usual thing, as honorable members know, which happens in most of the parliaments which work under a parliamentary system of government. I am sure that the honorable members are aware that India has always stood for peace, and ever since her independence has done what she could to preserve peace in the world, both in Korea and in Indochina. Our efforts led to a ceasefire, and for the first time with the settlement of the Indochina problem, there was no shooting war anywhere in the world. But now again there are war clouds, especially in the Far East, as has been emphasized by the Prime Minister time and again. Patience and tolerance are necessary to solve the tangle in Formosa. Our government have recognized the Chinese People's Republic as the government of China and have recognized the Chinese claim to the Cairo Declaration. If the Cairo Declaration is to have any value, then it is fairly certain that Formosa is part of China. But at the same time, one cannot forget the fact that things have got to be tackled patiently. If this problem of Formosa is to be solved in peaceful manner, that will take time, and it is towards that end I am sure that our Prime Minister is working so that there will be no clash in the Far East with regard to the question of Formosa. This has been prominently mentioned in the address of the President. We hope that patience will be exercised by both the sides to solve this question, and there will be no incident which might lead to serious consequences. Our agreement with China on Tibet, which formed the basis of the joint statement by China's and our Prime Ministers regarding Panchshila, must form the main principle through which international tension can be eased and finally peace established. I am glad, sir, that recently the King of Lawyers has accepted the idea of the 5 principles put forward in this declaration. It is usual in the present time of atomic age of talk about the dangers of the use of atom for warlike purposes. The question is whether the new instrument in the hands of man is going to be used for the benefit of humanity or for the destruction of humanity and human civilization as we know it today. Both the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics possess atomic weapons, and the United Kingdom government has now planned to manufacture hydrogen bombs for their security. As the Prime Minister has pointed out time and again, our country is not interested in the production of atomic weapons, but we are immensely interested in the use of atomic energy for peaceful purposes. There is no doubt whatever that in the interest of human civilization, these weapons should not only be banned but destroyed. The question is who is going to take the risk. There have been appeals that as the USA was the first nation to manufacture these dangerous weapons and use them, therefore they should set an example by destroying the bombs in their position. Stockpiling of atomic weapons would lead to dangerous situation, and somebody therefore ought to make a start in the matter of the destruction of these weapons. If moral standards are to be the guiding factor, it will be a great help to humanity. If this step can be taken, if only there is courage to do so, the USSR will have to follow suit, but unfortunately there is the fear complex. Most nations want to protect themselves and want to guard themselves against any surprise attacks by the other side. So the armaments race goes on. They forget that this mentality will eventually lead to war. They think that negotiations can take place only when one can speak from strength, but they forget that two can play at this game. So long as this view is held, the armament race will go on and tension must certainly increase. The conference which meets in London in a few days' time on disarmament, I hope will find a solution. The complete banning of nuclear weapons must be the first step that any conference should strive at, and I hope that under proper international supervision this step will be taken. But connected with this is the question of the reduction of conventional armaments. There must be a realistic approach to this problem. The USSR today possesses so much strength that it should be the first to agree to reduce its land army in the interest of the good relations that should exist between nations. One hopes that it will understand this position and take steps to get this done. I am glad that the Atomic Energy Commission of the United Nations has recognized that India has a part to play in this field and has asked our leading nuclear scientist Dr. Bhabha to preside over the conference proposed to be held at Geneva. The USSR has promised to show how she has been able to set up a nuclear plant producing electric power, but great steps have been taken in this connection also in the UK, and the recent report on atomic power placed as a white paper before the House of Commons shows that by about 1980 there will be about 12 to 13 stations working in various parts of that country to produce electricity and power for peaceful purposes. This is a great step, and our country will benefit by the steps that are being taken, because our intention is to use atomic power for peaceful purposes. Stop.